The scent of sandalwood and old furniture wax still hung in the air of my godfather, Elias's mansion. He was gone a week, but the vastness of this place, now mine, was a constant echo of his presence and my absence. I looked out the library window, the Californian landscape bathed in sun, stretching all the way to the ocean. The light was dazzling, but nothing compared to the brilliance of the will the lawyer handed me. Everything to the only person who truly cared, the document read. A lie that warmed my ego. I visited him once a year, a ritual of interest that he mistook for genuine love, while my sole goal was to secure my place in his will. Not that I needed it. I already had everything, or so I thought. But Elias's money was a kind of trophy, the final validation that my selfish choices, 8 years ago, were worth it. Life in New York, far from my brothers and the chaos of our childhood home, was a calculated ascent. I broke free, or so I thought. The news of Elias's death spread like wildfire, and I knew they would show up. My blood ran cold at the thought of Noah and Ben. They were the ghosts of my youth, the only ties I cut without remorse. The sound of the doorbell, a persistent echo that shattered the afternoon's tranquility, confirmed my worst suspicions. The housekeeper, Maria, looked at me, her eyes full of curiosity. "They're here, Miss Collins," she said, her voice almost a whisper. I took a deep breath, adjusting my expensive dress. The sight of them, standing at my door, was an affront to the new life I had built. The door opened. There they were, Noah with the same sardonic smirk, and Ben, taller, and with a seriousness I didn't remember seeing. I looked at them, and what I saw was a reminder of what I left behind. And the first battle, for a piece of my new world, was about to begin. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. The silence in the living room was so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. Noah was the first to speak, his tone casual, but his gaze was a sword. "So, you finally came home, Evie?" The irony was cruel. He knew this mansion wasn't my home, never was. My home was a dusty, cramped house in Arizona, filled with fights and empty promises. I forced a smile. "This is a new home, Noah, one I earned." Ben's gaze was fixed on the grand piano, his jaw tight. "You earned it by charming an old man who was practically family to us all?" He spat the words, and for a moment I saw the anger I had spent years trying to forget. I walked to the fireplace, turning my back to them to hide the slight tremor in my hands. Elias and I had a special connection. He understood me, something you two never did. The lie felt smooth on my tongue. The truth was, Elias was a means to an end. He was my escape. "We came because we need to talk about the will," Noah said, his voice now colder. "We heard he left you everything." I turned, my smile widening. "He did. The will is clear. I'm his sole heir." Ben's hands balled into fists. "Our family helped him build his empire, Evie. My father worked for him for 30 years. He promised us a share." A cynical laugh escaped my lips. "Promises are just words, Ben. The will is the law. Maybe if you'd worked harder, you'd have your own empire." The words hung in the air, a final, definitive barrier between us. I offered them a glass of water, a hollow gesture of hospitality, but their eyes, full of pain and betrayal, saw right through me. The game of appearances was over. Now the real fight had begun, and I had the home field advantage. Days turned into a suffocating routine of silence and thinly veiled hostility. Noah and Ben refused to leave, citing some obscure legal right to remain on the property until the will was fully executed. I called my lawyer, but even he confirmed they had a temporary right to stay. I was a prisoner in my own fortress, and they were the guards. The grand living room, once a symbol of my triumph, became a battleground of wills. We ate meals in silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound. The beautiful California sun outside seemed a mockery of the storm brewing inside the house. One morning, I found Ben in Elias's study, a room I had been avoiding. He was going through old photo albums, a pained expression on his face. He picked up a picture of me, a small girl with a shy smile, sitting on Elias's lap. "He always saw the good in you, Evie," he said without looking at me, "even when we stopped seeing it." The words were like a physical blow. I had to remind myself that their pain was irrelevant. My freedom was the only thing that mattered. Later, Noah cornered me in the hallway. "We're not here to fight, Evie," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "We just want to understand. Dad was a good man. He always said Elias would take care of us. Why did he change his mind?" The question was a trap. If I told him the truth, that I manipulated Elias, I'd lose my advantage. If I lied, I'd have to keep up the charade. I chose a third option. "He saw that I was capable, Noah, that I could manage his legacy. He saw that you two weren't." The words were cruel, but they were a shield. Noah's face hardened, and he walked away. The alliance, no matter how shaky, was over before it began. My life in the mansion began to feel like a house of cards, beautiful but fragile. Noah and Ben were always there, their presence a constant nagging reminder of my past. They weren't a threat, not yet, but their silent disapproval was eating at me. I started drinking more, the expensive wine a temporary escape from the tension. I would sit by the pool, watching the sunset, pretending I was still in control. But I wasn't. One afternoon, I found Ben in the garden, a place I never bothered with. He was tending to a small rose bush, the same kind our mother used to grow. My stomach twisted. "What are you doing?" I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. He looked up, his face calm. "Elias showed me this garden once. He said this rose bush was our mother's favorite. He always kept it pruned." His words were a knife to my heart. My mother. I had almost forgotten her. I had buried that part of my life so deep, I barely remembered what it felt like to miss her. Later that week, Noah invited me for a walk. He talked about our childhood, about the games we used to play, about the time he broke his arm, and I was the one who ran to get help. He wasn't trying to guilt me. He was just remembering. "I'm not the same person, Noah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I had to change. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't place. "Pity? Maybe you didn't have to change into this person, Evie. There was a good person in there." His words cracked my facade. My carefully constructed world was crumbling, and I had no one to blame but myself. I hope you're enjoying the story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to not miss the next chapters. The constant presence of Noah and Ben, and their quiet reminders of who I used to be, were starting to have an effect on me. I found myself remembering things I had intentionally forgotten. The sound of Ben's laughter when we played baseball in the backyard. Noah's comforting presence when I was scared of the dark. The way our mother's rose garden smelled after a rainstorm. These memories, once buried under layers of ambition and self-preservation, were now resurfacing, a tide of nostalgia threatening to drown me. I began to see the mansion not as a trophy, but as a cage. Every room was a monument to Elias's wealth, but none of them felt like home. I had traded a life with people who knew and loved me for a solitary existence in a golden prison. I would look at the opulent furniture and the priceless artwork, and all I could see were the faces of my brothers, their expressions of pain and betrayal a constant reproach. My beautiful new life was not beautiful at all. It was empty. One evening, I found Noah in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich. It was a simple, mundane act, but it seemed to hold more warmth and authenticity than anything I had done in years. "Are you all right, Evie?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, but my throat was tight with unshed tears. For the first time, I saw not the people who wanted a piece of my inheritance, but my brothers. The boys I had abandoned to pursue a dream of a life I thought was better. The facade I had so carefully built was finally cracking, revealing the raw, painful regret underneath. I was starting to realize that the price I paid for this fortune was much, much higher than I had anticipated. The California weather, usually so bright and inviting, seemed to reflect my inner turmoil. Gray clouds rolled in, and a steady, cold rain began to fall, trapping us inside the mansion. The days were long and silent, punctuated only by the distant rumble of thunder. I retreated further into myself, spending hours in the library, not reading, but simply staring out the window at the rain-soaked landscape. The mansion, once a symbol of my triumph, now felt like a mausoleum. I saw Noah and Ben together more and more. They would talk in hushed tones, their shared history an impenetrable barrier between them and me. I saw them laughing about a memory I wasn't a part of, and the pang of loneliness was a physical ache in my chest. I had always prided myself on my independence, but in that moment, I realized that what I had achieved was not independence, but isolation. I was completely, utterly alone. The wealth I had so craved was no substitute for the warmth of family. A truth so simple yet so profound it took my breath away. One night, I had a nightmare. I was a little girl again, lost in a big city, and I couldn't find my way home. I woke up in a cold sweat, the memory of the dream so vivid it felt real. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, seeking a glass of water. I found Ben there, looking out the window, his shoulders slumped. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. In that moment, surrounded by the silence of the mansion and the relentless rain, I saw a path back to them, a chance to mend what I had broken. But I was still too proud, too scared to take it. The legal notice arrived on a Tuesday, its crisp white envelope feeling like a death sentence in my hands. It was over. The waiting period had expired, and the will was officially mine, with no room for further contest. I felt a hollow, unsettling sense of victory as I walked into the living room, the document a shield in my hand. "It's done," I announced, my voice lacking the triumphant ring I had imagined. "The lawyers have cleared everything, the house, the money. It's all mine." Noah stood up from the antique sofa, his face a mask I couldn't read. Ben remained seated, his gaze fixed on me, a deep sadness in his eyes that was more cutting than any accusation. "We know," Ben said quietly, his voice a ghost of a whisper. "We're leaving in the morning." Those simple words hit me harder than any fight ever could. It wasn't about the money anymore. They were giving up on the fight, and in doing so, they were leaving me to my perfect, lonely life. The thought of being completely alone in this vast, silent mansion was a terror I had not anticipated. I felt my carefully constructed facade crack, and a desperate, raw plea escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Wait," I said, the word a small, desperate sound. Noah and Ben looked at me, a glimmer of surprise flickering in their eyes. The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken resentment. I lied," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush, a torrent of truth I had held back for so long. I didn't care about Elias. Not really. I didn't care about him at all. I just wanted his money. I was selfish. I always have been. And I'm so sorry. The confession, years in the making, was a relief and a torment, all at once. Noah took a step towards me. I braced myself, expecting the anger and bitterness I knew I deserved. But instead, he pulled me into a hug. A genuine, brotherly hug, the kind I hadn't felt in years. The dam I had built to protect myself finally broke, and I sobbed into his shoulder, the tears a torrent of a lifetime's worth of guilt and regret. Ben stood up and joined the embrace, his arms wrapping around both of us. The hug was the most honest, authentic thing to happen in the mansion since I arrived. I was no longer the sole heir of a vast fortune, but a broken sister, clinging to the only family I had left. I had won the game of inheritance, but I had lost everything that truly mattered, and the realization, in that moment, was the hardest and most painful consequence of all. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. The day of their departure arrived, but something fundamental had changed. The suffocating tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile peace. We sat together in the kitchen, drinking coffee. The early morning sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the marble counter, a stark contrast to the cold, distant atmosphere of the previous weeks. "So, what's next for you, Evie?" Ben asked, his voice gentle and free of judgment. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hoarse from the emotional storm of the previous night. This was the end goal. I never thought past this. Noah smiled, a real, genuine smile this time. Maybe it's a new beginning. The idea, once absurd and laughable, now held a glimmer of hope. I took a deep breath. "I want to share the inheritance with you," I said, my voice steady. It wasn't because they asked for it, or because I felt pressured. It was the right thing to do, the only path to a real future. Noah and Ben were hesitant at first. "We didn't come for the money, Evie," Ben insisted, his eyes soft with a truth that was a bitter pill for me to swallow. "We came because we were worried about you, about how alone you were." Their unwavering loyalty, even after all I had done, humbled me. But they eventually accepted, not as a handout, but as a symbolic gesture of our reconciliation. We decided to use a portion of the money to start a foundation in Elias's name, a way to honor his legacy and atone for my mistakes. As the morning went on, we talked about what we would do with the rest of the inheritance. We made a mutual decision to sell the mansion. The California sun still shone brightly outside, but I was no longer a prisoner in a golden cage. I was free. Free to choose a new path, to rebuild my life not on a foundation of greed and lies, but on a foundation of honesty and love. I was finally on my way home, not to a place, but to my family. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Selling the sprawling mansion felt surreal, like shedding a skin I no longer wanted or needed. We met with lawyers and financial advisors, navigating the complexities of setting up the foundation. It was exhausting, but for the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of purpose. I was no longer a lone wolf, but part of a team. Noah, with his meticulous attention to detail, handled the legal side of things. Ben, practical and steady, managed the finances. And I was in charge of the foundation's mission, to support underprivileged families, just like ours once was. It was a poetic kind of justice, a way of giving back what I had so selfishly taken. With the mansion sold, we found a small house in the suburbs. It was a far cry from the opulent, cold grandeur of Elias's estate, but it felt more like a true home than anywhere I had ever lived. It was a place where we could have dinner together at a simple wooden table, laugh about old memories, and argue about what to watch on TV without the weight of the past hanging over us. My relationship with my brothers wasn't magically fixed, but it was being rebuilt, brick by painful brick. There were still moments of awkward silence, and certain memories that brought a shadow to our faces, but we were a family again. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ben turned to me. "You know, Evie," he said, his voice soft. "He didn't just leave you the money. He left you us. He left you a chance to come back to us." I looked at Noah, who smiled at me. I thought back to the day I first read the will. The words, "to the only person who truly cared," burning a hole in my heart. Maybe Elias had seen through my greed all along. Maybe his final gift wasn't a fortune, but a second chance. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I was finally worthy of it. Years passed. The Elias Collins Family Foundation grew into a successful organization, helping countless people and bringing a sense of fulfillment I had never known. We were a family again, not just in name, but in the truest sense of the word. The mansion, with its painful memories, was a distant blur. We rarely talked about the inheritance or the pain of the past. It was a story we had already lived, a wound that had finally healed. I was no longer Evie Collins, the rich villainess, but simply Evie, the sister. I was content. I had a job I was passionate about, a home that was filled with love and laughter, and most importantly, I had my brothers back. But life, as I had learned the hard way, has a way of coming full circle, testing your progress. One morning, I received a phone call from a lawyer I didn't recognize. It was about a distant relative, a cousin I hadn't seen in years. He had passed away, and in a final act of kindness, had left me a small sum of money. The amount was insignificant, a mere fraction of Elias's fortune, but the gesture was a cruel echo of the past. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I felt a familiar, cold wave of greed wash over me. The temptation was there, a siren song promising more of what I no longer needed. A tiny voice whispered, "Keep it. It's so little. No one would know." But I walked to the window, looking out at the sunset. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and pink, a sight I once viewed as a backdrop to my lonely existence. But now, it was a reminder of my redemption. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I made a choice that had nothing to do with money. I called the lawyer back. "Please donate the entire amount to the foundation," I said, my voice steady. The old Evie, the greedy one, was gone. And I knew, in that moment, that I had finally, truly, paid for my past. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more.